Stock options cancelled. Celeste Warwick's voice rang through the boardroom like a death sentence. Her flawlessly manicured fingers pushed the termination document across the mahogany table toward me, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her blood-red lips. Every single share. Voided. You'll walk away with nothing but your pathetic severance package. The room seemed to tilt. 7 years of my life, 7 years of 80-hour weeks, missed birthdays, sacrificed relationships, all leading up to stock options that were supposed to be my ticket to freedom. Genesis Biopharmaceuticals had gone public just 3 months earlier, and my vested options sat at $2.3 million. My escape plan. My future. I stared down at the document, my hands shaking, but not from fear. From a rage so pure it felt like ice running through my veins. That's when I smiled. Bylaw 24 billion, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. The non-disclosure trap your mother signed when she transitioned you into the chairman role. Celeste's smile faltered. Just for a second, but I caught it. Voiding my stock automatically voids your chairman immunity clause. They're waiting for your resignation at the boardroom door. The color drained from her face. Welcome to the Payback Office channel, where karma doesn't just catch up. It runs a marathon in stilettos and crosses the finish line with a smile. If you're new here, or if you've been following along as justice unfolds, consider hitting subscribe. We're closing in on 7,000 subscribers, and having you along means everything. Now let me take you back to where all of this started. I'm Sienna Rhodes, and until 3 hours before that scene, I was Senior Director of Clinical Operations at Genesis Biopharmaceuticals. My grandmother raised me in a small Detroit apartment after my parents died in a car accident when I was 6. She cleaned offices at night and worked as a seamstress by day, but she never let our circumstances define what we were worth. She taught me that remembering where you came from doesn't mean staying there. It means remembering the people who helped you climb on your way up. That kind of empathy, that connection to struggle, became my edge in a corporate world that too often confuses cruelty with strength. Genesis wasn't always the cold, calculating machine it turned into under Celeste. When I joined 7 years ago, it was still run by her mother, Vivian Warwick, a brilliant scientist who'd grown the company from a 2-person garage startup into a biotech powerhouse with over 3,000 employees. Vivian cared about profit, sure, but she cared about purpose too. Our mission was developing affordable treatments for rare diseases Big Pharma ignored, because the margins weren't attractive enough. I started as a clinical trials coordinator, handling patient recruitment and data collection for our flagship drug, Genesis 7, a treatment for a rare pediatric kidney disorder. The pay was decent, but what kept me there were the stock options, generous grants vesting over 4 years, given to every employee from the janitors to the C-suite. We build this together. We profit together. Vivian used to say at company meetings, her eyes bright with genuine conviction. I threw myself into the work, coordinated 17 clinical trials over 5 years, always under budget and ahead of schedule. I built relationships with patient advocacy groups, smoothed over FDA hurdles, trained a team of coordinators who became some of the most respected people in the industry. My work didn't go unnoticed. 3 years ago, Vivian promoted me to Senior Director of Clinical Operations, overseeing all late-stage trials across the company's pipeline. The promotion came with a real salary bump and, more importantly, a massive stock grant, 150,000 shares at a strike price of $2.50. Genesis was still private then, worth maybe $500 million, but with 3 drugs approaching FDA approval, the smart money was betting on an IPO within 2 years. Things broke right, those options could be worth millions. They broke better than right. Genesis 7 got FDA approval 18 months ago. Our second drug, treating a rare blood disorder, followed 6 months after that. Suddenly we weren't just a promising startup. We were a validated biotech company with real revenue and a clear path to profitability. That's when Celeste came back. Vivian's daughter had spent the previous decade bouncing around investment banks in New York, earning a reputation as a ruthless dealmaker who'd sell her own grandmother for the right EBITDA multiple. She'd had almost no involvement with Genesis, showing up to board meetings maybe twice a year, always dressed for a fashion show rather than a biotech company. But the moment she smelled IPO money, she came running home. Vivian was 68 and beginning to show signs of exhaustion. The board had been quietly pushing her toward naming a successor, and despite my hope that she'd pick one of the executives who'd actually built the place, She chose blood over merit. Celeste became CEO 6 months before the IPO. The change was immediate and brutal. Within weeks she'd fired or pushed out half the executive team, replacing them with finance types from her New York network who knew nothing about drug development, but everything about squeezing margins. The mission statement got rewritten, stripped of any language about affordable treatment or social responsibility. Now it was all about maximizing shareholder value and optimizing resource allocation. In plain terms, profit over patience. I kept my head down and focused on my trials. Less than a year stood between me and my big option grant fully vesting, and then I'd cash out and leave, maybe start a consulting firm helping smaller biotech companies through clinical development. I'd already started quietly building a portfolio of my most successful trials, positioning myself for future clients. Celeste noticed my detachment. She wanted loyalty, not competence, people who'd applaud her brilliance and execute her vision without question. I was neither. The first warning came 4 months ago in a pipeline review meeting. I was presenting Phase 3 results for Genesis 12, a treatment for a rare pediatric neurological disorder. The data was exceptional. The drug hit every primary and secondary endpoint with minimal side effects, exactly the kind of breakthrough that had made Genesis special. Recommended next steps, I concluded, are to file for FDA approval and begin planning for commercial launch. Based on the patient population and our pricing analysis, we're looking at peak annual revenues of approximately $200 million. Celeste stared at me across the table, her expression unreadable. $200 million, she repeated flatly. For a drug that took us 6 years and $300 million to develop. That's correct, I said, thrown by her tone. It's a rare disease. The patient population is only about 8,000 in the US, but this could be life-changing for. Terminate the program, she cut in. The room went silent. I'm sorry, I managed. Genesis -12 doesn't meet our new investment hurdles. We require a minimum of 3x return on development costs within 5 years of launch. This drug doesn't clear that bar. Terminate it and reallocate the resources to Genesis -19. Genesis 19 was a hair loss cosmetic treatment. A massive potential market, sure, but hardly the life-saving medicine Genesis had built its name on. Celeste, with respect, we have children in the compassionate use program who are depending on this drug. We've made commitments to the patient community. We can't just. We can and we will. Her voice went ice cold. This is a business, Sienna, not a charity. If you can't understand that, perhaps you're not the right fit for the leadership team going forward. The threat just hung there. I choked back a dozen responses burning in my throat and gave a stiff nod. Understood. But I didn't understand. I couldn't understand how anyone could look at dying children and see only an inadequate return on investment. I couldn't understand how Vivian's own daughter had become this. That night I drafted my resignation letter. I'd survive 8 more months until my options vested. Then walk away for good. Fate had other plans. 2 weeks later, Vivian Warwick died of a stroke, gone before the ambulance even arrived, her brilliant mind silenced in an instant. The funeral turned into a spectacle, and Celeste made sure of it. Vintage Chanel suit, an Oscar-worthy eulogy about her mother's vision and legacy, all while carefully positioning herself as the chosen heir to that legacy. I stood in the back of the church watching the performance and felt something shift in me. Vivian deserved better than this. The company deserved better. The patients deserved better. But I still needed those options to vest, so I waited. Celeste consolidated power fast after Vivian's death. The board, packed with investors focused solely on the upcoming IPO, gave her whatever she wanted. She restructured the company, wiped out entire departments, outsourced critical functions to contractors. Morale collapsed. Good, talented people who'd built Genesis alongside Vivian started leaving in droves. I stayed. 8 months became 6. 6 became 3. The IPO finally happened on a crisp October morning. Genesis started trading at $42 a share and closed the day at $58. My options, struck at $2.50, were suddenly worth over $8 million on paper. But I couldn't exercise until they vested, and couldn't sell until 90 days past the IPO under the company's lockup agreement. I just had to survive 3 more months. That's when Celeste's campaign to push me out began. It started subtly. My invites to key meetings mysteriously vanished. Projects I'd run for years got quietly reassigned to her New York loyalists. My team got scattered across other departments. My budget slashed by 60%. I documented all of it. Every slight, every reassignment, every conversation. My grandmother had taught me to trust my gut, and my gut was screaming that Celeste was building a case to fire me before my options vested. 2 months before vesting, she made her move. I got called into a meeting with Celeste and Hamilton Price, the new chief operating officer she'd imported from her banking days. Everything I despised about corporate climbers, slick and soulless, utterly convinced of his own brilliance despite never having developed a drug or run a clinical trial in his life. Sienna, we need to discuss your performance, Celeste began, sliding a document across the table. We've been tracking several concerning metrics in your department. Picked it up. A performance improvement plan, the corporate kiss of death. 30 days to hit impossible targets or face termination. These metrics, I said slowly, scanning it, are for projects I haven't managed in 4 months. Projects that were reassigned to Hamilton's team. Exactly, Hamilton jumped in, oozing fake sympathy. We've had to clean up several messes you left behind. Timelines missed, budgets exceeded, quality issues. It's really quite concerning. A complete lie, every word of it. I knew it, they knew it, and they knew I knew it. I'd like to review the specific data supporting these claims, I said calmly. Project files, budget reports, timeline documents. I'm sure there's been some kind of miscommunication. Celeste's smile turned razor sharp. Of course, we'll have Hamilton's team compile everything and send it over. In the meantime, we need you to sign this PIP acknowledging the issues and committing to the improvement plan. I'll need to have my attorney review this first. The room's temperature dropped 10 degrees. That seems unnecessary, Celeste said, her voice dangerously soft. Unless you're planning to be difficult about this. I'm planning to be thorough, I replied, holding her gaze without blinking. I've dedicated 7 years to this company. If my performance is suddenly in question, I want to understand exactly what changed and why. I never signed the PIP. Instead, I hired Catherine Wu, one of Boston's best employment attorneys, and got ready for a fight. Catherine was brilliant. Within a week, she'd sent back a detailed response systematically dismantling every claim in the PIP using documentation I'd kept for years, and filed a formal HR complaint about the hostile work environment, pointedly noting the suspicious timing relative to my vesting date. Celeste backed off. The PIP quietly disappeared, and I was left alone to finish out my time. 1 month before vesting, I started planning my exit, updated my resume, reached out to my network, scheduled meetings with headhunters. I was done with Genesis. The day my options vested, I'd exercise them, wait out the 90-day lockup, sell my shares, and walk away with enough money to never work for someone like Celeste again. I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. 3 days before my vesting date, a calendar invite showed up for a strategic planning session with Celeste. No agenda, no other attendees, just the 2 of us and a conference room. I nearly skipped it. Every instinct screamed trap. But I was too close to the finish line to risk giving her an excuse to call me insubordinate. I arrived at the boardroom right on time. Celeste was already seated at the head of the table like a queen on her throne, a single folder in front of her. Sienna, thank you for coming, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Please sit. I sat, keeping my face neutral. I'll get right to the point, she continued, flipping the folder open. We've decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately. My heart stopped. On what grounds? Violation of your employment agreement. Specifically, the non-compete and confidentiality clauses. She slid a document across, a printout of an email I'd sent a former colleague, now a VP at a competing biotech 3 weeks earlier. Innocuous stuff, industry gossip, and a note about my job search, but Celeste had highlighted one sentence in yellow. The clinical data from our recent trials has been exceptionally strong, particularly in the rare disease space, she read aloud, tapping the line with a manicured nail, constitutes disclosure of confidential company information to a competitor. It's a clear violation of your employment agreement.
Ist daher, stond.
That's public information. We issued a press release about those trial results 2 months ago. The press release discussed top-line data. Your email implies access to detailed clinical information that hasn't been publicly disclosed. It doesn't imply anything. I was making small talk with a colleague. That's your interpretation. Our legal team disagrees. She slid over another document. This is your termination letter. Per Section 7.3 of your employment agreement, termination for cause results in immediate forfeiture of all unvested equity compensation. There it was, the real reason for the whole charade. My 150,000 shares, worth over $8 million, gone with the stroke of a pen. You can't do this, I said, hating how much my voice shook. This is completely fabricated. You're just trying to steal my options before they vest. Stock options cancelled. Her voice suddenly rose, sharp and triumphant, clearly savoring my distress like a vampire feeding. Every single share. Voided. You'll walk away with nothing but your pathetic severance package. The room spun. 7 years of my life gone for nothing so this woman could save the company $8 million. But then something clicked. A memory from 18 months earlier, during the leadership transition when Celeste took over as CEO. A special board meeting had been called to revise the corporate bylaws, updating them for the new leadership structure and preparing for the IPO. I'd been asked to take notes, since the regular corporate secretary was out on medical leave. I'd sat in the corner with my laptop, dutifully recording every discussion, vote, and amendment to the company's governing documents, and I remembered one bylaw in particular, Bylaw 24 billion, proposed by Vivian's attorney, a crusty old corporate lawyer named Arthur Blackwood who'd been with the company since its founding. The bylaw was designed to protect employee equity from exactly this kind of executive overreach. The language was dense legalese, but the intent was clear. Any executive with chairman-level authority who unilaterally voided employee stock options for reasons other than criminal conduct would automatically trigger a review of their own compensation and authority. More importantly, it would void certain immunity clauses shielding executives from shareholder lawsuits. Vivian's insurance policy. Her way of making sure whoever succeeded her couldn't gut the equity program she'd built. And Celeste had no idea it existed. Vivian had signed the updated bylaws in one of her final acts as chairman, just days before her stroke, while Celeste was too busy planning the IPO roadshow to bother with corporate governance minutiae. She'd inherited the chairman title along with every right and responsibility written into those bylaws, Bylaw 24 billion included. A cold, calculating smile started forming on my lips. Something funny? Celeste snapped, clearly irritated I wasn't begging or in tears. Bylaw 24 billion, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. Her expression flickered, confusion then concern. What? The non-disclosure trap your mother signed when she transitioned you into the chairman role. I leaned back, watching the color drain from her face. Voiding my stock automatically voids your chairman immunity clause. They're waiting for your resignation at the boardroom door. Her eyes went wide. You're bluffing. Am I? I pulled out my phone and opened my email. I took the liberty of reaching out to Arthur Blackwood this morning when I received your mysterious meeting invitation. You remember Arthur, your mother's attorney, the one who drafted the bylaw amendments 18 months ago? I turned my phone so she could see the thread. Arthur had replied within the hour, clearly relishing the chance to explain the legal trap Vivian had set. According to Arthur, I continued, Bylaw 24 billion was specifically designed to prevent exactly what you're trying to do. Any unilateral cancellation of vested or near-vested employee equity triggers an automatic board review. During that review, the chairman's immunity from shareholder derivative suits is suspended. I watched the implications land. Genesis had gone public at $42 and closed the previous day at $61 a share. Shareholders were happy for now. But there was already murmuring about Celeste's management style, the exodus of experienced staff, the abandonment of the mission-driven culture Vivian had built. If those shareholders suddenly had legal standing to sue Celeste personally for mismanagement, for the controversial calls she'd made, for the value destruction hiding beneath a rising stock price. You wouldn't, Celeste whispered. I wouldn't have to, I replied. Arthur is required by law to report bylaw violations to the board. I forwarded him your termination letter an hour ago. He was scheduled to brief the independent directors at 3 o'clock. I checked my watch. 3:47 p.m. Right on cue her phone buzzed. Then again. And again. She looked down at the screen, and I watched her face shift from confident triumph to ashen horror. The board is convening an emergency meeting, I said conversationally. I believe they'd like to discuss your decision to void my equity compensation among other concerns that have been raised about your leadership. Arthur mentioned something about fiduciary duty violations and potential securities fraud, but I'm sure it's all just a misunderstanding. Her hands were shaking now. You can't. I'm the CEO. I'm the chairman. They can't just. Actually, per bylaw 24 billion, they can. I stood, gathering my things. The immunity clause that's now void was the only thing protecting you from personal liability for some of your more creative decisions. The Genesis Mini's 12 termination, for example. Did you know the patient advocacy groups filed a formal complaint with the SEC about that? They alleged that you killed a promising drug program to artificially inflate short-term profitability metrics before the IPO. That was clearly news to her. I could tell by how much wider her eyes got. Without chairman immunity, you're personally exposed to any shareholder suits that emerge from that investigation. And Arthur tells me there are at least 6 other decisions in the past 8 months that could form the basis for derivative litigation. The board is probably calculating their exposure right now and deciding whether you're worth the liability. Her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and flinched. Walter Gaines, lead independent director. She didn't answer. You should probably take that, I suggested. Though I imagine they'll want to have the conversation in person, the boardroom is just down the hall, after all. I walked to the door, then paused and looked back. She was still frozen in her chair, staring at the ringing phone. You know what the saddest part is, I said. Your mother built something extraordinary. She created a company that made money and saved lives. She built a culture where people felt valued and invested in the mission. You could have continued that legacy. You could have been a leader worth following. I shook my head. But you saw dollar signs instead of human beings. You saw employees as cost centers instead of assets. And now you're going to lose everything because you were too greedy to let one person keep what they'd earned. I opened the door and walked into the hallway. The executive floor had gone eerily quiet. Everyone either in the emergency board meeting or suddenly finding urgent reasons to be elsewhere. As I passed the boardroom, I could see Walter Gaines and the other independent directors through the glass walls, faces grave, Arthur Blackwood beside them with a thick binder of documents in front of him. Walter caught my eye and gave a small nod. I nodded back. The elevator arrived, and as the doors closed I saw Celeste emerge from the conference room, pale, her confident stride replaced by uncertain steps toward the boardroom and whatever reckoning waited there. I should have felt triumphant. I just detonated a corporate nuclear weapon and watched it go off in real time. Mostly I just felt tired. The truth was, bylaw 24 billion had been a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. It didn't automatically strip Celeste of power. It just exposed her to accountability she'd thought she was immune from. What came next depended on the board, on the shareholders, on whether the independent directors had the nerve to stand up to her. But I'd done my part. I'd pulled the thread that would unravel her whole empire of cruelty. Catherine Wu was waiting in the lobby. I texted her a heads-up from the boardroom. How do you feel? She asked as we walked toward the parking garage. Ask me when I know if it worked, I said. Oh, it worked, Catherine grinned. I just got off the phone with Arthur. The board is voting on whether to request Celeste's immediate resignation. Walter Gaines is apparently pushing hard for it. Turns out, he was one of Vivian's oldest friends and has been looking for an excuse to remove Celeste since the IPO. I stopped walking. They're actually going to fire her? Probably not fire. More like offer her a choice. Resign gracefully with a modest severance or be terminated for cause, and face the shareholder lawsuits without any company support. Her smile widened. Either way, she's done. And Walter made it clear that any resolution involves protecting your equity compensation. Apparently, he's been furious about the way Celeste has been treating the old guard employees. Months of accumulated weight lifted off me all at once. My options were safe. More than that, I'd protected myself, and maybe saved Genesis from further ruin under Celeste. There's more, Catherine added. Walter wants to meet with you tomorrow. Off the record, he mentioned that the board is looking for an interim COO, while they search for a new CEO. Someone who understands the company's original mission and has the operational expertise to steady the ship.
Ist daher.
He wants to offer me the COO position? He wants to talk to you about it. No guarantees, but I think you'd be in a strong position to negotiate. My phone buzzed. An email from the Genesis board secretary. All equity compensation actions taken in the past 72 hours had been reversed pending board review of executive authority protocols. My stock option vesting schedule remained on track per the original grant agreement. I read it twice just to be sure I wasn't imagining things. My options were safe, $8 million still on track to vest in 3 days, and possibly a COO offer that would let me help restore Genesis to what Vivian had envisioned. The elevator dinged behind us and I turned to see who was coming. Hamilton Price, Celeste's right-hand man, carrying a banker's box of personal items from his desk, red-faced, refusing to make eye contact as he hurried past toward the parking garage. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Looks like the purge has begun. That night I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine, still processing everything. My phone buzzed nonstop. Colleagues sending congratulations mixed with confusion about the executive shakeup. Recruiters who'd somehow already heard I was available. And one unexpected call from Arthur Blackwood himself. Vivian would be proud, the old attorney said, his voice warm with approval. She put that bylaw in place because she knew her daughter. She hoped Celeste would rise to the occasion, but she prepared for the possibility that she wouldn't. You did exactly what Vivian intended. You used the tools she left behind to protect what she'd built. I was just protecting my own equity, I replied, uncomfortable with the praise. Maybe. But you also protected the company from someone who was destroying it from the inside. That takes courage. After we hung up, I pulled out an old photo from my desk drawer. My first day at Genesis, a company picnic 7 years ago. Vivian stood at the center, surrounded by employees. Her face lit up with genuine joy. I was off to the side, barely visible. Just another new hire in a crowd. I wondered what Vivian would think of what I'd done. Justice or betrayal. Her daughter was about to lose everything because I'd weaponized a corporate bylaw. But then I thought about Genesis 12, the drug Celeste had killed for short-term profit, the families counting on that treatment, the children who'd keep suffering because Celeste couldn't see past next quarter's earnings. No, I'd done the right thing. My phone buzzed once more. An email from Walter Gaines with a meeting invite for 9 a.m. the next morning, subject line, The Future of Genesis. I accepted and let myself smile just a little. The next morning I arrived at Genesis headquarters at 8:45. The building felt different, lighter, as if some oppressive fog had lifted overnight. Employees who'd been walking around like zombies for months chatted in the hallways, voices cautiously optimistic. Walter Gaines met me in a small conference room on the executive floor, far from the boardroom where Celeste had tried to destroy my career less than 24 hours earlier. Sienna, thank you for coming. Walter was in his late 60s, silver-haired, with the weathered look of a man who'd seen every corporate drama imaginable, and was too old to be impressed by any of them. I'll cut to the chase. Celeste resigned last night, effective immediately. The board has accepted her resignation, and is beginning the search for a new CEO. I nodded, unsure what response fit. We need leadership stability while that search is underway, Walter continued. The company is at a critical juncture. The IPO was successful, but we're facing significant operational challenges. Employee morale is in the toilet. We've lost key talent. Our pipeline strategy is a mess. And frankly, the investment community is starting to ask questions about our direction. He leaned in, his eyes serious. I knew your grandmother, Sienna. That caught me completely off guard. You what? Dolores Rhodes. She worked as a seamstress for my wife's boutique in Detroit for years, made the most beautiful alterations, could take a $50 dress from a department store and make it look like haute couture. Walter smiled at the memory. When I heard you join Genesis, I looked into your background. Dolores used to talk about you all the time, how proud she was that you'd gotten your degree, that you were working in biotech. She passed away. What, 4 years ago? 5, I said quietly, my throat tightening. I'm sorry, she was a remarkable woman. His expression sobered again. She'd be proud of what you did yesterday. Not the corporate maneuvering, though that was impressively executed, but the why behind it. You didn't do it just for the money. You did it because Celeste was destroying something worth preserving. I couldn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded. The board wants to offer you the position of Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately. We'll put together a competitive compensation package, including a significant equity grant. Your primary responsibility will be stabilizing operations while we search for a new CEO. That means rebuilding the leadership team, restoring the culture, and getting our clinical pipeline back on track. What about the CEO search? I asked. Who are you looking for? Walter's smile turned knowing. We're looking for someone who understands both the science and the business. Someone who's proven they can execute operationally while maintaining sight of the mission. Someone who has the respect of the employee base and the courage to stand up to the board when necessary. He paused. We're looking for someone like you, Sienna. But we understand if you need time in the COO role first. Building a company isn't a sprint. The implication was obvious. This was a trial run. Prove myself as COO and the CEO role might follow. I'll need to bring in my own leadership team, I said, my mind already sorting through the list of talented people who'd left over the past year. Some of the best people we had jumped ship when Celeste took over. I want to bring them back. Done. You'll have full authority over organizational structure and hiring. And Genesis -12, I want to restart that program. Walter nodded. The board is already prepared to approve that. We've received preliminary interest from the FDA about an expedited review pathway, given the patient need. It'll be expensive, but it's the right thing to do. Then I accept. We shook hands, and just like that I went from nearly losing everything to becoming chief operating officer of a publicly traded biotech company worth $3 billion. The news broke internally within the hour. My phone exploded with messages, some congratulatory, some cautiously optimistic, a handful clearly from people trying to get back in my good graces after months of avoiding me. I spent the rest of the day in back-to-back meetings with department heads, trying to gauge the damage Celeste had left behind and figure out what needed fixing first. It was worse than I'd expected. Entire clinical programs gutted, key vendor relationships wrecked by Hamilton Price's aggressive cost-cutting, the company's standing in the patient advocacy community in shambles. But there were bright spots too. The science was still strong, the late-stage pipeline still viable, and most importantly, the employees who'd survived Celeste's purge were hungry for leadership they could believe in. By 7 p.m., I was exhausted but energized, 3 key hires already made, all former Genesis people who'd left during Celeste's reign, and a company-wide town hall scheduled for the next day. As I packed up to leave, there was a knock at my office door. Thomas Bailey, one of our senior scientists who'd been with the company since the early days. Sorry to bother you, he said, hovering in the doorway. I just wanted to say thank you for what you did for standing up to her. I was just protecting my options, I deflected, uncomfortable with the praise. No, Thomas shook his head firmly. You stood up to a bully who was destroying everything Vivian built. Half the company wanted to do what you did, but we were too scared. You weren't. He left before I could answer, but his words stuck with me. Maybe I had been brave. Or maybe I'd just been desperate enough to take a gamble that happened to pay off. Either way, I was here now, and I had a responsibility to make the most of it. 3 days later, my stock options vested right on schedule. I exercised them immediately, paying $375,000 for shares worth over $8 million at current prices. But I didn't sell, not yet. If I was going to rebuild Genesis, I needed real skin in the game. Employees needed to see their new COO invested in the company's long-term future, not just chasing a quick payout. The lockup period would expire in 67 days anyway. I could wait. The town hall was standing room only. I stood on the small cafeteria stage looking out at hundreds of faces, some hopeful, some skeptical, all waiting to see whether I was the real thing, or just another executive promising change and delivering the same old story. I'm not going to pretend the past year hasn't been difficult. I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. We've lost good people. We've lost sight of our mission. We've made decisions that prioritize short-term profits over the patients we're supposed to serve. I let that land. But we're going to fix it. Starting today, Genesis is going back to its roots. We're going to develop drugs that matter, for patients who need them, even if the financial returns aren't blockbuster level. We're going to rebuild a culture where people feel valued and heard. And we're going to do it together. The applause started slow, then built into something that felt like relief mixed with hope. Over the following weeks, I worked 16-hour days rebuilding what Celeste had broken. I restarted the Genesis 12 program and personally called the patient advocacy groups to apologize for how they'd been treated. I restructured clinical operations, promoted talented coordinators who'd been overlooked, fired the worst of Celeste's loyalists, and brought back experienced leaders who understood the mission. The board gave me remarkable freedom to operate, trusting I knew what needed doing. Walter checked in regularly, offering advice when asked, otherwise staying out of my way. 2 months into my tenure as COO, we got FDA approval for Genesis 15, our blood disorder treatment, proof the science was still strong, that we could still execute despite the chaos of the past year. The stock climbed to $73 a share. My options were now worth over $10 million. I finally sold half my position, using the proceeds to pay off student loans, buy a modest house, and set up a charitable foundation in my grandmother's name providing scholarships for Detroit kids pursuing STEM careers. I held on to the other half. This wasn't over yet. For months after Celeste's resignation, the board officially offered me the CEO position, and I accepted. The press release went out the next morning, and my phone immediately exploded with media requests. The story was too perfect for business press to pass up. Young executive outsmarts ruthless boss, saves company, rises to the top. The reality was messier. I'd gotten lucky Vivian had put bylaw 24 billion in place, lucky I'd been asked to take notes at that board meeting, lucky Arthur Blackwood was still around to explain the legal implications. And I'd been desperate. If my options had already vested, would I have taken the risk? Would I have stood up to Celeste without millions of dollars on the line? I wanted to believe I would have. I wasn't sure. What I was sure of was that I now had a responsibility, not just to shareholders or the board, but to the employees who'd stuck with Genesis through the worst of it, and to the patients counting on us to develop treatments nobody else would touch. My first major decision as CEO was restructuring our equity compensation program, making sure every employee, from janitors to executives, had meaningful stock options that would actually vest. I called it the Vivian Warwick Legacy Equity Plan, and other biotech companies started copying it. My second decision was establishing an independent ethics board with real authority to review major strategic decisions and keep them aligned with the company's mission. No more killing promising drugs just to boost quarterly numbers. Genesis's stock didn't soar the way it might have under someone chasing short-term shareholder returns, but it grew steadily, and more importantly, so did our impact. We got 3 more drugs approved in my first 2 years as CEO, including Genesis 12, the rare pediatric kidney disease treatment Celeste had tried to kill. I still remember the day we got that approval. We held a celebration at headquarters and invited the patient families. There was a 6-year-old girl named Emma who'd been in our compassionate use program. She'd been in a wheelchair when the program started, but by the celebration she was running around the cafeteria full of energy, her kidneys functioning normally for the first time in her life. Her mother found me afterward, tears streaming down her face. "You saved my daughter's life," she said, gripping my hands. "The scientists saved her life," I deflected. "I just made sure the program didn't get cancelled." "No," she shook her head firmly. "If you hadn't stood up when you did, Genesis -12 would be dead. Emma would still be deteriorating. You saved her." That night, alone in my office, I finally let myself cry, not from sadness or stress, but from the sheer weight of gratitude and responsibility. This was why the fight with Celeste had mattered. Not the money, not the title. Moments like this. The aftermath of Celeste's resignation turned out less dramatic than I'd expected. She landed on her feet, the way people like her always do, taking a senior role at a private equity firm where her ruthless approach to cost-cutting was treated as an asset rather than a liability. We never spoke again after that day in the boardroom. Hamilton Price and the rest of her inner circle scattered to other companies, their resumes conveniently glossing over their time at Genesis during the transition. Walter Gaines stayed on the board another 3 years before retiring, but remained a mentor and friend. He told me once that watching me rebuild Genesis reminded him why he'd fallen in love with business in the first place, the possibility that companies could be a force for good, not just wealth extraction machines. Arthur Blackwood passed away 18 months after I became CEO. At his funeral, his daughter told me one of his proudest moments in his entire legal career was watching bylaw 24 billion work exactly as Vivian had intended. "He called you a fighter," she said. Said you reminded him of Vivian when she was young. I kept a photo of Vivian on my desk, right beside one of my grandmother, two women who taught me that where you come from matters less than what you do with the opportunities you're given, that empathy and strength aren't opposites but complementary forces that make real leadership possible. Looking back, people often ask if I'd do it all again, knowing the risks. The answer is yes, without hesitation. Not for the money or the title, but because the alternative was unthinkable, letting Celeste steal what I'd earned, destroy what Vivian had built, and hurt patients who depended on us. That would have been the real failure. Standing up to her cost me sleep, stress, years off my life. But it gave me something more valuable. Proof that the system doesn't always protect the bullies. Sometimes, if you're smart enough and brave enough, you can make it work for justice instead. If you've made it this far in my story, I hope it reminded you that workplace tyranny doesn't have to be endured in silence. Sometimes the tools you need to fight back are already there, buried in contracts or bylaws or policies nobody bothered to read carefully. If you found value in hearing how this played out, consider subscribing to the Payback Office channel. Share these stories with someone who needs to hear that fighting back is possible. Together, we're building a community of 7,000 subscribers who believe accountability matters and justice is worth fighting for. The scoreboard doesn't always favor the powerful. Sometimes, with the right preparation and a little courage, it favors the people who refuse to give up.